Nelson Mandela once said education was the most powerful weapon to change the world. I guess that makes us the world's greatest arms dealer.
Yeah, buddy.
Paul, where did you get that?
I built it.
He is Vice Chairman of the House Local and Consent Calendars Committee. He also sits on the Higher Education and Energy Resources Committees. He is an attorney specializing in civil litigation, and he's also a partner at the law firm of Kelly Hart and Hallman. In August 2018, he announced his candidacy for Speaker of the Texas House. Next up, we have State Representative Drew Springer of Munster. He has represented House District 68 since 2013, Vice Chairman of House County Affairs, and he also sits on the Redistricting and Ways and Means Committee. Previously, he has worked as an accountant and president for a Texas railcar company. Next, Chris Patty of Marshall has represented House District 9 since 2013. He sits on House Calendars, Licensing and Administrative Procedures, and State Affairs. He's a member of the Texas Conservative Coalition. He's also Vice Chairman of the Young Texans Legislative Caucus, and he's previously served as Mayor of Marshall and on the Marshall City Commission. Last, Ron Simmons of Carrollton has represented House District 65 since 2013, sits on House Appropriations, Local and Consent Calendars, and Transportation, also serves on the Texas Conservative Coalition Research Institute Board of Directors, and he is co-founder and chairman of Retirement Advisors of America, an investment services firm. All right, so how many Republicans are coming back in 2019?
Well, that's an easy question, yeah. Throw it right out there.
Right, right. How many Republicans will the Texas House see in 2019 when the legislature convenes?
These five will be
Right,
back,
right.
you know, for sure.
Pretty
You know,
comfortable.
so.
Right, right. So we have 95 right now. Are we gonna 15, 10? How many seats do you guys predict that we're going to lose?
We're certainly going to fight for 95 to come back.
Okay.
So for sure.
Okay.
And you know, and I think that we're going to have the opportunity to see a very strong conservative group of people return to the state house.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
I think we'll see significant change. I think we'll see our numbers drop. I think we can find hard to keep them all there. We have great members, a great caucus with the Republicans in the Texas House, but I think we're going to see a shift. I've heard everything from 3 to 4, and I've heard people say 14 or 15. I think the truth is probably somewhere in the middle, but time will tell. So right now, the polarization of politics seems to be taking hold. I think we'll see the pendulum swing back a little bit. We may see a course correction in some ways. But again, I don't doubt for a second we will return with a strong Republican majority in the Texas House, and with that said, we also have a strong Republican speaker.
Absolutely, and I think for the range, I'm on the low end of Travis's. I have a hard time believing that as close as the U.S. Senate race is, to then find out that Governor Abbott's probably 20 points better in that then you come down and check the governor, and then you would go down and say, oh, well, I'm not going to vote for Linda Coop or Morgan Meyer, all these guys who work their districts, who knows who people are. I have a difficult time thinking we have that kind of turnover, but hey, that's what elections are for.
Yeah, I think there's definite losses there. I tend to think it's a little on the lower end too. I mean, I think the 5 to 6 range is probably pretty close. Obviously, Dallas County will be a significant piece of that. And the fights are primarily in the urban areas. We don't see a lot of it in areas like where I represent. So we'll see. We're going to fight hard for all the seats, and certainly want to help our friends, and so we'll be looking to do that.
Representative Simmons, do you have thoughts?
Well, you know, Texas is a center-right state, no question about it. And as Drew mentioned, those are great representatives of some of these highly challenged areas. Democrats also have a few seats that are on the bubble, right? And we're going to be fighting for those as well. So it may be that we end up with the same net number, and that's what absolutely, as Chairman Zerwas said, we're going to be working very, very hard for that. We don't give up anything.
Mm-hmm. And you know, we've kind of been already mentioned a couple times. We have 2 official speaker candidates on stage with us. The other 3 have, you know, been speculated or on short list for potential.
Yet to announce is the right word.
You know, I just kind of want to get your thoughts. What is this race about? Tom Craddock, a current one of your colleagues and a former Speaker of the House, was telling Ross Ramsey yesterday that the biggest question on members' minds right now is, will we be electing a leader that, quote, stands up and defends the House against the governor and lieutenant governors. Is that what this race is about?
Well, you know, I'll just jump in. Obviously, I've been a candidate for a year now, and I've had the opportunity to circle around with all the members, talk to them about what's going on in their district, what are the things that we need to do in the House, are there things we need to change, and certainly people are very forthcoming, and I think that's what the Speaker needs to take back with them when they, you know, come before the membership as a whole, or what are the things that we need to do, can do better. That is very high on the list of everybody that I talk to, is that, and this is Republican and Democrat, are we going to have a Speaker that's going to be able to still work with, you know, the Senate and the governor's staff and the governor himself, but also recognize that the sovereignty of the House is an incredibly important thing, and that the Speaker needs to be there to you know, protect the House from things that might not be in the interest of the body as a whole, but to also make sure that the House works for the House and is in a position to, you know, deal with the things that might come over that might not be in the interest of the body as a whole.
Do you agree with that, Representative Clardy?
I do, Cassie, and what I've gathered from the meetings I've had with dozens and dozens, probably close to 100 members, both Republican and Democrat, what I'm hearing consistently is the members want to see a member-driven body. They want to see where the members are really in charge of developing policy and moving those forward through legislation. And we really want to see a return to the old mantra that has been historical in Texas, that members vote your district. Members should be able to represent their districts, vote for what's in the best interest of the people they're elected to represent, and do so without fear of repercussion or penalty. And I think that's something we're going to see us return to. The issue about the ability to deal with the governor, the lieutenant governor, you know, that's one of the things I didn't fully appreciate until you get in the job. There is built in by our founders this institutional friction between the two chambers and between the executive and the legislative. That can be either lessened or it can be heightened depending upon the personalities in those roles. I think that's one thing that what I'm hearing from our membership, what they want to see is someone who can work productively, especially when we're all making this assumption that it's going to be proven true in November, that we'll have a Republican governor, Republican lieutenant governor, or a Republican speaker. I think it's a pretty reasonable expectation that those individuals can work together and for the common good and have common ground that we can work on. But in those instances where there are some institutional differences, we do need someone who can stand up and take the position for the House in I think a persuasive and effective way. And I think our House members want somebody that when they stand up, they can see them. And I'm not saying that point to a particular candidate, but you know, I just think it's an important factor to consider, perhaps. If I could, as a matter of personal privilege, Cassie, I do want to recognize my newest member to our family. It's on my son John and Milla Clardy, our newlyweds, just got here. So I'd always like to embarrass them if I had that opportunity.
Of course.
So.
Well, I mean, you know, I guess this question is more directed towards you three, since you.
You know, I was here yesterday and heard Tom make those comments, and I think that there was a whole lot before that led up to that. But, you know, from my standpoint, it is members want to represent their district. And in that encompasses, if I'm representing my district, I need a speaker that is going to let the House work. And work by working means not get run over by the Senate or the governor, but also not just being sand in the gears to stop everything from working. And so, you know, we want to be able to do that. As Travis said, you also want without repercussions. You know, I represent 22 counties, 10% of the landmass of the state of Texas. I will vote things that aren't always in line with maybe what the Republican platform is. And I need to be able to vote my district without worrying about that's going to get me in a penalty box where my bills aren't going to be heard, where I'm not going to be put in certain positions to be able to do the best for the state and the best for my district.
I hate to kind of echo some of the same things, but I think it's important to hammer it home. I think I care most about being able to represent my district. I'm the voice of 6 counties in this state. That is a district that's unique, very different than Ron's and everyone else that's up here, and we ought to be able to represent those folks. And so I think that's critically important. But I do agree with Speaker Craddock, too, that it needs to be someone that we're confident, when necessary, not to be confrontational, but be willing to, when necessary, to stand up and to take some stands at times that may be a little uncomfortable, may be difficult, It also requires that that member represent a district that will allow them to do that, because they still represent a district as well. And there are times where they may take a position for the good of the House that may get them maybe not in some trouble, but it may raise some questions back home. And so if you're in a marginal district and you're winning primaries 52-48, you're probably not a legitimate candidate for Speaker. If you're beating folks 2-1 when you have legitimate candidates, then yeah, you probably meet that qualification and you are strong enough in your district to do that. But I think it's important that the House continue to do as it has and be very independent, allow the members themselves to be independent in both their districts.
Yeah, I'm assuming you agree with your colleagues on stage.
Yeah, I think the other thing is that most of the issues we deal with are not partisan, and most of the issues we deal with, there's not a huge disagreement between the governor, the Senate, and the executive branch. But when those situations do come up, whether it's how we deal with school finance or how we deal with property tax or something like that, we need to be able to have a speaker in the room that understands not only what the House says, but also what his caucus says, okay? We need to work across the aisle when we can, but at the end of the day, elections do have consequences. And right now, the Republicans are in the majority, so we need to have Republican answers for the Texas problems, because that's what the state has called us. Now, can the Democrats participate in that? Yes, and it takes a very deft speaker to understand how to work that. The question is, do we want a leader of the Texas House, or do we want a member that members can push around? I want a leader of the Texas House, is what I want.
Right. And so I guess just kind of taking a step back, do you think that come the first day of session in 2019, do you think that the House is going to be electing a more conservative speaker candidate than Speaker Strauss?
Well, let me take that
Yeah,
first. Let these guys think
yeah.
about it for a minute, okay? John's had to go first. John's had to go first every time. Speaker Strauss
I'm in
and
the middle. I love my spot.
which has been part of the issue, by the way.
That's right.
That's my desk mate. He knows we're good, right? Yeah. Is that Speaker Strauss and I have had a great relationship. We've done we did great transportation bill. We just got rid of one-punch voting. He and I worked on that close together. And he had to represent, as Chris said, his district as well as the House. I do think that we'll have a center-right candidate. That's what I think we'll have. We won't have someone on the far left of our caucus or the far right of our caucus, and it will absolutely be a Republican speaker that the caucus agrees on.
Okay. Well, that's actually something that I wanted to get into because, as you know, the Republican caucus changed its bylaws last December to try to maybe pave the way for a more conservative speaker candidate by electing someone within the caucus. The state party has asked all Republican members or candidates who are going to be in the Texas House come 2019 to sign a pledge. My numbers are correct. I believe 2 of the 5 on the stage have signed the pledge. So Clardy and Patty and Zerwas have not signed it, and then Simmons and Springer have. So what role are the Democrats going to be playing in electing the next speaker, if any?
Well, I'll jump in because I've been very forthcoming about that, is that I didn't sign the pledge, and as a speaker candidate, I feel it's incredibly important that the speaker be able to lead from a position of the House as a whole and not a portion of the House. And so as a candidate, I feel it's important that we engage both the Democrats and the Republicans in the ultimate election of the speaker. Now, how each caucus rallies around a given person is fine, however you want to do it. The Republican caucus has come up with a bit of an iterative voting process with different thresholds and things of that nature, and they've codified that. And that's how our caucus, which was a unanimous vote in terms of embracing that, has said that's what we're going to do. The Democrat caucus may do something different, but the point is I think it's entirely appropriate for either caucus to, develop a mechanism by which they can rally around a given individual for speaker. On a personal basis, on a philosophical basis, as a speaker candidate, I feel it's important for me to not have signed that pledge for the party because I do adhere to this principle that the Speaker of the House is ultimately elected by the body as a whole. Everything that happens leading up to that is fine. Let's just let each caucus determine what they want to do in terms of endorsing or rallying around a given individual. But ultimately, I think that vote needs to reflect the fact that the Speaker has been embraced by both caucuses in one form or another, and then has the opportunity to lead from that balanced perspective as opposed to one side or the other.
Right. And Representative Clark, I mean, you also kind of have a reasoning for why you haven't signed the pledge.
Yeah, Cassie, if you start with the philosophy, what did we want to accomplish? And again, this was universally supported. It was voted on unanimously by us as a caucus, as Republicans. We want the next speaker to be a Republican and be supported by a strong majority of the Republican members of that caucus. We all agree on that. But if you go back to how that whole pledge stuff started, it was because there was not any kind of procedure in place. That was developed, I think, about a year ago, following our last Republican caucus retreat. We started that process. We voted on it there and began to develop the rules, procedures. I know Chris served on that committee. They've done very good work to move in that way. But the whole point is we actually put in place what we were being asked to pledge. It's kind of redundant to me to pledge to do something that you've already voted to do.
So does that mean that, I mean, whoever the caucus does get behind, that you plan to support them?
Yeah, I think it's really, I mean, you can play out all these different games,
Right.
but where I think we come down is, where I see the process being helpful, there was a stigma that attached to Speaker Strauss when he came on that he never really went away. And that happened before at least we got there. And the perception was he was selected by a bunch of Democrats with a handful of rogue Republicans, and that's how this happened. You know, and you can argue the history of it, but at the end of the day, I think where this process is helpful, I think we'll have a consensus speaker choice well in advance of, it's probably sometime around the election, but I think before we have this caucus vote. And the strength of it is it's going to validate, it's going to ratify, it's going to verify that this is the person that the Republicans support. I don't think that caucus meeting is going to turn into where the decision is made. That's one of the reasons I've been out in the field talking to members. I think it's important that the members have an opportunity to meet individually with the candidate, talk about them in their district, about what their important issues are, and then come to that decision, I think, in a more thoughtful way. I think to wait until one magic moment and then start doing this kind of new election process may not be the most thoughtful way for us to do it. So I think the value of it is it allows the caucus to again, validate the decision that we've already made, and we can move forward with that. But, you know, I tell people all the time, I am a constitutional conservative. And our Constitution, which speaks to this, the Constitution we all took an oath to preserve, the one oath we all have taken is to represent our districts and represent the state and observe the Constitution, says that the members shall choose among themselves, the 150 members shall choose among themselves a speaker. That's what our forebears laid out for us. And so I think it's been good enough for them all these years. It's good enough for us. Every member that's in the body, the 150 members, the other 149 members, each have taken the same oath. Each represent essentially the same number of people and owe a duty to their district to represent them and represent them well. And so that again is what I'm committed to. So I feel like I am 5 by 5 with my Republican colleagues and committing to a Republican speaker. But I'm also going to, first and foremost, I am going to represent my district and fulfill my oath to the state.
Representative Simmons and Springer, you two have signed on to the caucus pledge. I mean, do you agree with what your colleagues are saying?
You know, to a point, I do. I mean, but let's face it, this is not a reflection of what the caucus is. 75%, over 75% of us have signed that pledge within the caucus. The Democrats have voted as a bloc for almost a decade now. And for the Republicans to say, we want to come together and really stand behind one candidate, and to say that that's wrong, and that's sort of that's what we read in the media. It's like, oh my God, the Republicans are going to actually vote together. Well, the Democrats have done that for a decade now. That being said, I will say in that selection process, I think that whoever comes forward as our speaker candidate will be somebody that has 10, 15, 20 Democrats that they know that they're going to work with, that are going to be part of it. And yeah, they'll probably then end up picking up all the Democrats from there. But I think that when we look for that Republican candidate that can get to 60%, preferably 65%, the first ballot, and that's the way ours is. And I think to Travis's point, I think it will probably be done before we walk in December 1st and make that selection. And that's who we're going to look to do. We obviously want somebody that works with the Democrats because, as Ron said, everything we vote on is not partisan. The vast majority of things we deal with are, you know, what's good for our school system. That's urban, suburban, and rural, and usually those are more of where the tweaks are, not whether it's Republican or Democrat. And so we have to have somebody who is respecting the body as a whole. But I think to sit here and say, because we think that it ought to be a Republican that is elected with a vast majority of Republicans is wrong, I don't agree with. And so I feel comfortable, though, that it will be somebody who wins with that caucus vote.
Okay. And then I guess another question that I have is, you know, during session there's the big three. The governor, lieutenant governor, and speaker of the House are supposed to have breakfast, and that did not really happen last session in 2017. So what's your vision for the big three, and how do you kind of want, I mean, do you want the breakfast to return?
I believe in breakfast. I'm a one on breakfast. No, I've said repeatedly with a number of people I've talked to, if I can't commit to anything else, I can promise you, I can show up once a week and have breakfast with the governor and the lieutenant governor. I can actually look forward to it. I hope Glenn Hager would join us. Let's make it the big four. We'll just get another chair. No, it is important. And again, there was some breakdown last session in those meetings, and I think that's lamentable. Part of the job is to be able to keep the lines of communication open to the other branches and with the Senate. And so, yes, absolutely, that's something you do. And it's more than just something that you do and check the box on went to breakfast. That is an opportunity to really sit there and proverbially break bread with these members and with the governor, lieutenant governor, and talk about the issues. And that's where you find that common ground. Are there going to be times where tensions flare, where there's going to be pressure, there's going to be contentious? Yes. But that's one of the things I think we need in our next speaker. It's something I think that I do very well. It's part of my training, having tried cases, been in an adversarial environment, that you have to be able to engage and disengage. You have to be able to engage in a different way and approach it. But what you can't do is walk out of the room and shut the door and never come back. That's a dereliction of duty. Our speaker needs to be someone who's able to go in there and where occasion maybe lighten the mood, not have a food fight at breakfast or anything, but be able to have a conversation civilly, respectfully. But again, there's a bunch of legendary stories about how then Governor Bush was able to deal with Lieutenant Governor Pollock and with Laney, and how that dynamic worked. And that was a very productive time in Texas history. I hope we can return to that. I think that's what we need in our next speaker.
I think that the breakfast is kind of the symbolic thing that shows whether there's communication among the executive branch and with the lieutenant governor, and I think with the comptroller also. I think that's incredibly important, because the financial interests of the state are so paramount to everything that we do. But there's a huge amount of communication that can and need to occur other than this sort of symbolic breakfast that occurs every Wednesday morning and people are around. And there's a huge amount of conversation that occurs through the staff, which I think is an incredibly important thing to think about with the next speaker that comes in. Is they're going to hit the ground new. They're going to have to hit the ground with staff that's going to be able to pick up the pieces and really run forward. Because without that, then we're kind of, what I will say, sitting ducks for what is going over on the Senate, which is well organized and doesn't have the same kind of process they have to go through like we have to go through. And so I think it's incredibly important that the communications stay open, just like Travis has said. I certainly abide by that, and I think that, I may not agree, and I may not be in a position to just let something, bowl over into the House, but I've always had the ability to maintain that communication. And I think that's incredibly important in the interest of the state of Texas, that we continue to be able to have those conversations, whether it's at this standing breakfast, but certainly, in that building, the opportunity to just meet on a fairly random basis even, and have the important conversations that need to occur, and that the staff have the ability to interact with their counterparts in the executive branch as well as over in the Senate.
Let's get into what you guys actually want to see happen next session. Let's start with property taxes. Where is the House on property tax reform, and will the legislature be able to come together next session and make a difference for Texans?
Chris?
Chris. Well, everyone.
Go ahead, Chris.
But where is the House on property tax? I think the House is where it was last session. The House wants to talk about true reform. I think there was a question last session, and there continues to be a question of what is reform. I don't personally believe reform is some of the discussions we've been having. I think true reform is reforming school finance in this state. I think everyone knows, and as I talk to people back home, they recognize, as I do, We know who we write the biggest check to. We know where the problem is, and we have to address that. And so I think any discussion of reform has to involve school finance reform. I don't want to just put forward policy that slows the growth. Let's do something that actually reforms and makes that tax bill less next year than it was this year. The only way you accomplish that is through school finance reform. So we can talk about rollback rates and caps and all those things. It does nothing but slow the growth of property tax. It doesn't fix the root problem, which is school finance.
All right, Chris is right on that. And you know, last time it was talked about as relief, and relief was absolutely wrong. It was only reform and reform only. It's what I've worked on in the interim. I was at Tatara on Thursday talking about I've got a bill that is going to look at taking the M&O rate down 25%, 50%, and 100%. If you eliminate 100%, you get rid of all recapture. The state now pays it, and so we reduce that local property tax. And that's when I talk to people and they talk about school finance, most of them are saying my property tax bill is too high on my school side of things. You know, you do that with various consumptions, and we'll be laying that out, a lower level out there, and we'll be coming out with that. But we need to have the intellectual conversation about that. And is that what everybody wants to go to, which is basically a subscription deal? I'm going to pay the same amount of taxes every day rather than once a year writing it. And that's what a consumption tax sort of moves to. And I actually keep it at 6 1/4 for those who think I'm going to make it 25%. That's not true. In there, but you know, we need to have that. But on the cap issue, you know, there's also a lot of misnomer that a cap means you can't go above. No, that means you just have to get voters' approval to do that. And you can do that through the general election and not even have to have the cost of a special election. That was on the ballot in the primary. Of course, I say I have a homogeneous district because everybody votes as Republicans, and I get letters back that says, I'm not a Republican, quit sending me your mail, and they're 4 R's. Because they always vote for the sheriff and the county judge, and you've got to vote in the Republican primary to pick those. 94% of the people in my district said they wanted to have a 4% cap. It passed more than any single thing, and that included the pro-life agenda that was on that ballot by more than 25 points. And so I think the citizens want to have that final say, and they say, look, we're fine letting you go to 4, but if you go over, we just want the final approval on it because we want to know that it's something that we value, like public safety or roads or whatever it is, to be able to do that. And so to say that takes local control, no, that gives even more local control because it's the voters who are making that decision.
And that, I'll say that, I echo everything my colleagues have said on this with regard to property tax and the support of the schools, and that's where we need to make a difference, and we don't provide any true relief until we do that, and I can't say anything more about that. What I will say in my district, which was a paramount interest, and I picked up a very, very good bill on that ultimately got tagged on to some of the stuff that was going on in property tax reform, is the appraisal process. And the appraisal process in my district is considered one that is totally inherently disadvantaged to the homeowner, the property owner. Mm-hmm. And so we came forward, and it came out actually out of Senator Nelson's office, and it was a good bill. And in fact, it was picked up by folks over here and tagged onto it. Ultimately, it didn't get there, we all know. But I think inherent in any type of property tax relief and reform, there has to be some address of the appraisal process. Mm-hmm. And for my district, you know, they're happy to pay their taxes, but the appraisal process and the way they're treated when they challenge those taxes is totally inappropriate.
Well, I mean, go ahead.
I want to say one thing on this, and this is I want to thank you for the trip for putting on this event. Yesterday I had the privilege of going to see the Democratic Wishlist, I think in the morning, and then last afternoon in this room I listened to our friends that are in the Freedom Caucus and their wish list. As I've gone around the state talking to the members about what are the priorities for the 86th legislature, the very good news is it is absolutely universal and common among the members that the top 2 issues are school financing and property tax relief. Across the board, across the spectrum. That makes it a lot easier to solve a problem. You know, unfortunately, last session we had been told by the Supreme Court, and the phrase we all use, that our school financing system is lawful but awful. It's constitutional, but it's not equitable and fair. It's not consistent with the principles laid out in the Texas Constitution to provide a fair, free, and equitable public school system. last session, I was hopeful. I went into that session believing we would actually address the issue even though we weren't mandated by a Supreme Court ruling. We seemed to spend our entire session looking through the bathroom keyhole at the issue, and we never focused on the real issue. And I think we squandered an opportunity to move the ball forward on this, and there were a lot of good ideas that just didn't get traction where we could have fixed it. But as I've talked to my district and I've talked to people around the state, the folks in Texas want us to be talking about classrooms and not bathrooms.
Right.
And I think that is what we are charged to do, and I know what I'm committed to do, and I think my colleagues up here are too. But again, it's across the board. So this is an opportunity. We can seize the initiative with strong leadership. We can go out there, lead out on this issue, and offer some solutions. I'm not sure what they are, but what I'm very confident in, I am always taken aback by how talented and creative and intelligent and articulate and passionate the people that I serve with in the Texas House. I'll even say that applies to some members of the Senate. And it's a remarkable body that we have the privilege to serve with, and we can get this right. But we just need to make up our minds this is what we're going to get right, and we're going to.
And one final, just a little stat that a lot of people miss because we talk about how high property taxes are. Texas, when you combine all local and state taxes, is 46th in the nation in taxes. So we were very low tax. We put a lot of emphasis on one. And do we need to rebalance it? That's what we're looking at now.
Okay, so property tax reform, school finance. What are the other things that are going to, you think, be dominating conversations, not just in the House, but across the chamber or across the hall in the Senate?
Well, job number one is always the budget. And this year it starts with us, which is another thing that's problematic with us not having our leader chosen, which is why I think we're pushing to have this decision made sooner than later so we can start the process of HB1, the budget. That's always the job. I think we ought to get that job done in 140 days. That's a personal opinion. There's nothing special about a special session. Let's get the job done in the time allotted and go to the House. And if each member has things that are important to their district and where they live and to their constituencies, and we need to allow the members to have an opportunity to do those things. So that's kind of a big picture of the two big things we talked about, the issues within the individual districts. But at the end of the day, the one job we have to do is balance the budget.
And Travis is right. We've gotten some sort of encouraging figures as of recent. The comptroller estimated we'd have an extra $3 billion at the end of this biennium. That's huge, and it's also a great marker for where it looks like the economy of the state is going. And so it's a very encouraging thing. I told somebody just before I came in that it might be fun to be on appropriations this time, and it might be fun to be the chair of appropriations this time. Last time maybe not so much, but we got there and we got a balanced budget, and it was a good place. What I'll say, and it's job one. We got to get the budget done, and we always have. And so I'm confident that committee in the next session will get that done. I would just put out there two quick issues, and I'll defer to my colleagues. I think school finance and property taxes is that big policy issue that I think we need to tackle next legislative session. But I think urgently what we need to do is we need to address the Hurricane Harvey issues. There's big money caught up in that, and we've got to address that, and a lot of that's caught up in our school systems and making that equitable, as well as a whole lot of devastation that occurred along the entire Gulf Coast. And the second one, which I think is equally important, that as a body we need to urgently take up, is school safety. We've had a horrific shooting, and we've seen horrific shootings around the nation. We need to step up, look into that seriously. The governor did a very deep dive into that, came up with a lot of ideas. Some of them may be better than others, but a lot of ideas. I think it's incumbent upon us as a body to say, okay, what do our schools need to support them to create the safest possible environment for our kids? I've quit using the term soft targets because it is one that I think sends such a negative connotation. But our school superintendents and our school board members understand what the needs are in their districts to create a safe environment, so that we go back to having a sense of confidence that when our kids go to our schools, they are in fact in a safe environment. Those are issues that I think we need to take up early on.
What do you think?
Well, I think there are three things that I'm thinking about in addition to the school finance. And that is, on Hurricane Harvey, add a little bit to that, and I'm a DFW suburban person, so looked at it from a different viewpoint than Chairman Zerwas and the people down there that were horrendously affected, and the work that they did was incredible. But I sent a letter to the governor and the speaker within a few days after Hurricane Harvey, suggesting that we set up another state infrastructure bank and put a minimum of $2 billion in there so that we could immediately begin to give these homeowners relief, or to backstop the local community banks that might be loaning and having to loan at above an 80-20 ratio. And we did not do that. In hindsight, we absolutely should have done it, because there are still families that have not gotten back on their feet yet because they can't get the money yet out of the federal government. All that money would be paid back. And that was a great place for us to be able to step in and do it. Would we have had to have had a special session for a couple of days? Yes. But in my opinion, that would have been the right thing to do. So I'll be filing legislation to set up a state infrastructure bank for disasters such as this, and we'll have that available. And the other thing that I think we need to keep focused on, if we're going to have this economic engine going, and that is, are we funding our roads properly, and are we funding the right roads properly, to make sure that places like Austin, between Georgetown and San Marcos, that's a $9 billion project. The way we allocate money right now, that'll never be built. What we need to do is what we did in House Bill 20 that everybody supported here, and that's make sure that we allocate money to the projects that we need to get done first, and then we have to shift it around. We have a lot of highways. We have over 200,000 lane miles of highways in Texas. And we have to make sure that we not only connect rural to the metroplexes, but we also have to move people through the metroplexes as well.
Yeah. And Representative Clardy, you made a vague reference to what was commonly referred to as the bathroom bill last session. If Dan Patrick's Texas Senate brings back some version of the bathroom bill, what's going to happen in the House? Representative Simmons, you carried a version of that. Granted, there was kind of a wide net, and yours kind of fell into that category. But what will the House do next session?
I'm glad you asked the question about this, because what the Senate did and what the House tried to do were very, very different. Mm-hmm. And I filed a bill that said, let's just take a pause. If this is an issue, then it's probably an issue statewide, and we as a state body need to decide what the regulations should be all across the state, similar like Uber or texting. You know, you gotta, because if you had different regulations in different cities, that could be problematic. So I filed a bill that would have done that. I just filed it, told the Speaker's office about it. They said just hold on to it. Then in late March, the Speaker's office themselves came to me and said, let's move that bill. We need that solution. And so I began moving the bill. Chairman Cook came to me and said, this bill is going to be the savior for House members. So we began moving the bill, got it into committee, had the hearing, and then nothing. No, never got it voted out. Didn't hear back from the Speaker's office. No idea what happened. We tried to do an amendment late in the session that Chris carried, and who knows? There were 80 sponsors for the bill. Whether or not we should have done it, I don't know. I didn't ask to move the bill. The Speaker's office told me to move the bill, and then somewhere along the line, they changed their mind on how they wanted to process that, which is fine, by the way, but they did not communicate that to the members as well as we should have. So I think actually most of the issue was solved when President Trump removed the Title IX deal that President Obama had done. So I think we've got bigger issues to focus on.
I agree with that. And I was a joint author on that bill with Ron, and it did it. What it was going to do was just clear the air. We were going to be able to move on and get back to the business of the state of Texas, and just table it, for lack of a better word. It was going to return us to the status quo ante, which I think is what we should have done. But for whatever reason, that failed. So your question, Cassie, is what do we do with the Senate if they come back with the same thing? One thing before we get there, though, we need to take a little bit of a political look at the Senate, and we may see a very different Senate than we saw last session. There's a lot of moving parts and pieces right now, how that may be. So, you got to see who shows up to play the game in January, and that may very much dictate what we see. But what I'm hopeful, though, is I think Ron was on the right track with the approach we had, and it would have had the advantage, I think, of taking that off the table. It seems like every bill that we looked at last session was viewed through the prism of, can this be amended to add on something from the bathroom bill? True. It was very distracting to the business of the people of Texas. And we do not want a repeat of that.
you've got to sit here and look at, while we've talked about the big issues, we need a balance of the membership working on the big issues, but also the issues that affect everyday Texans, like standing 4 to 8 hours in a driver's license line, like mental health issues that we have around the state, indigent defense, the things that aren't marquee items that, that we need to tackle. We have got to focus on those because, at the end of the day, it's just important for that person who had to take a day off of work and didn't get paid to stand in a driver's license office. When they get better service at Walmart than they do there, we've got a problem that we've got to address. And we can't let those things distract us.
Nothing against our sponsor, Walmart.
No, I gave them a plug. I said they give great customer service.
That's right. Yeah. And Cassie, I'm just kind of bringing it back to the title of this panel on wish list. And so if you ask me what's my wish list, kind of a bigger picture view here is that we always have these issues of the day. And we don't even know as we sit here today what's going to be that issue next session that's going to come up that no one was thinking about, and it sucks all the air out of the room. My concern is that we got a growing state that's doing well. People are moving here for a lot of great reasons. I don't think we're taking a long enough view on investing in the infrastructure we need to support that growth. Our horizon seems to always be the next primary. When we're making decisions, we're going in and these issues are flying at us. I think we have really got to do our best to begin to look a little further than that. And by a little 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now, are we investing as we should be in infrastructure? And when I say infrastructure, I'm not just talking about transportation. I consider education to be a part of that and workforce development. That's one of my biggest concerns right now is the area of workforce development and whether or not we're prepared. Are we meeting market needs right now for a growing state in the industries that are here and would come here? I don't think we are. And I think that involves a larger discussion on public education and higher education, whether or not we have a system that worked really well decades and decades ago, but is it really modeled for what we need today? I don't think it is. I think we can talk about school finance and all these other things related to education, but I really think we need to take a pretty big step back and begin to really evaluate how we do education in the state, period. And are we doing it in a way that will actually produce the product that the market needs? I don't think that's the case. I think we have a model right now that is geared towards about 25% of our student population that are going to go off to great universities like Texas A&M. And that's great. We need those folks, to go off and be doctors, lawyers, engineers, and all that thing. But what about that 75% that are not going to do that? And we know that. The numbers show us that they're not going to do that. We have always, and when I was growing up, I was the first in my family to go to college on either side. So it was always, you're going to college, I don't care what you do, but you're going to college. And many of you have probably heard the same thing. Well, that's great. We send more people to college than we ever have. The problem is they're getting out with degrees in things we don't need. They got mountains of debt, can't find a job. They're not much better off than they were when they went. That's a problem. Meanwhile, I have large industries. The largest employers in my district, Eastman Chemical, and great companies are saying, hey, 60 to 65% of my workforce is retirement eligible in the next 3 to 5 years, and I don't have enough people in the pipeline to fill those positions. That's a problem. So I think we really have to hopefully get more into this mode of let's think about what we need to be doing to address the challenges of 10, 15, 20, 50 years from now, and not get so distracted on that issue of the day. Not that we don't need to address those things, and there are things that come up, and we need to take good looks at those and come up with solutions. But I'm incredibly concerned that we're not taking a long enough view and as we look at these issues and have the political will to do the right thing, do right and risk consequences for the betterment of the state.
Before you answer, I'm going to finish this up. So if you have questions, go ahead and start making your way down here. But go ahead.
Just one. I want to pick up on Chris's looking long term, and one of those things is that all of us heard about recently, and I think we really need to take a very serious look at, and that's ultimately the credit worthiness of the state. I've looked at all my 6 sessions going into my 7th session through the prism of the fiscal health of the state. And then what is that one big thing that's going to harm us from a credit worthiness standpoint? One of those long-term things that we have to look at, and we, as the group, the party that's in the majority right now, is what is our pension burden out there, and how are we stepping up and dealing with that? We're not where Illinois is, and we shouldn't be where Illinois is, or any of these other states that have a huge, insurmountable pension debt basically out there. We have the opportunity to look at that and say, you know, this is something that we need to do for the next generation of Texans and the ones after that. Because if we don't, then we're going to leave an insurmountable burden to them. There are ways to do it. We know there's ways to do it. They may not get a whole lot of the headlines and glamour out there and stuff, but I will guarantee you in 20, 25, 30 years, it will be a headline, and they'll say, you know, what did those guys back in 2019 do when we were in a pretty good situation to be able to address what some of this is? I think that's the creditworthiness of the state is that one thing that I look at and say, what is the greatest threat to that creditworthiness that we have out there?
Thanks so much. All right, let's start questions. Start with you.
Good morning. Thank you all for being here. So to jump back to the school finance conversation, equally important to the school finance discussion is, of course, in addition to property tax reform, the impact that school finance has on student outcomes. And like Representative Patty has mentioned, student outcomes in our state could likely be better. So my question for y'all is, have you been paying attention to the Public School Finance Commission, which is very focused on student outcomes and their college and career readiness? And if so, what do you think about the recommendations that have currently emerged from that commission?
I really follow this pretty closely. The several higher education and keenly aware of the education issues carried Governor Abbott's teacher compensation bill in the special. What I see coming out of the commission is there's some broad consensus in the Joint Committee, House and Senate. And I think one of the most important things is the fully funding of pre-K education. That was an initiative Governor Abbott took back a couple of sessions. And I think what all the states are showing, even the people that are skeptics of that, and there was some concern, and we've heard this from some of our colleagues about the nanny state, that we can't start having our state raise our children younger and younger. But we know, and it's indisputable, that if you don't have a child reading to age level at second or third grade, they'll never catch up. And you learn to read, and then you read to learn. And so what do we do to affect that? And I think it does do with the focus of an earlier educational attainment. And then to Chris's point, he made a very good point about the vocational technical training being a more robust part of our educational structure. You know, and Chris, you make it about, just and say with this, you said one thing about we don't look far enough down the road. We have done that. When you look at the water issue, we have shown the ability to be visionary in what we do. But I think we've done that in some ways with transportation. But education has been the one of the big three issues that are always there. You go back 100 years, look at the Awesome American Statesman, it's going to show you that we're talking public education, transportation, and water. They don't change. And now it's time for us to step on public education with some real solutions. But I think there's been good work done on that commission. I'm encouraged by what's been laid out.
Good morning. As I'm sure you're aware, the City of Austin recently passed an ordinance that requires businesses to offer paid sick leave to their employees. And one of your colleagues, Representative Workman, has already promised to introduce a bill that would essentially nullify that and say that no city can pass such an ordinance. So my question is, in general, what do you think the relationship should be between local government and the states? And on this specific issue, do you think there's room for legislative action at the state level?
Well, I think there is going to be legislative action on that particular issue, but I do think you bring up even a bigger question. I think it's something, and I don't know how to solve it, but I do think that we do need to look at a bigger picture, whether you call it omnibus or whatever, on where local control should be, and that's in a lot of areas, and where state needs to have an overlook, okay? And we've done some of those things on a piecemeal basis, like you did Uber and we did taxi and all that, but it seems like we fight over that every year. Is there a way to kind of reset and say, okay, these are the things that should be local control, and these are the type issues that the state needs to look at in a whole? And can we do that and work with the cities and the counties and us can we come up with a agreed upon solution for that, so that we don't have to deal with these one-off issues every single time? That's a challenge, and I hope that we could get together on something like that.
And I would just say that is a challenge, because so many of these things are the one-off issue that we have to address and stuff. But I think that'd be great if we could do something like that.
I don't know if we can.
I don't know if we can either, but I would at least say, I I espouse the idea that we ought to see, local control as much as we can, as much as reasonable. But there are those things that bubble up, like the Uber bill last time that Chris carried so well, that ultimately says, look, we got to address this across the state. Others, I would say, that maybe we're taking too big of a step forward and concentrating things in Austin and not leaving them out to the cities and counties.
And I would say that I tell everyone proudly that I'm a recovering locally elected official. I was at city council and was mayor of the town I live in, and have a great appreciation for what they do. And oftentimes, so many of these issues, they're just not issues in my district either. As we do quite often in the legislature, we try to kill gnats with sledgehammers. And where we have problems, one-off type situations, whether it's in Austin or some other area, and they're not things that even come up in my district. And that's a frustrating thing, is that so many times everyone else gets caught up in it too when we get involved, because we're a wrecking ball when we come through. So that's the challenge. I think there needs to continue to be a real strong respect for local communities and the roles they play in governing their constituents as well. But we do have to find that balance, I would say, definitely.
Thank you for doing this today. I'm Mayor Pro Tem of the City of Fayette. I'd like your opinion on mud reform, please.
On
mud reform.
On mud reforms.
Mud reform.
I don't have a mud in my district, so I'll let somebody else take this one.
Well, I'll take it. I probably have carried more mud bills than any of these guys sitting up here. It's an incredibly important part of my district, I have to say, and my district, I will tell you, would not be flourishing today were it not for the municipal utility districts that we've been able to create out there. And so, are there some things that need to be reformed? Are there some things in terms of the governance and the decisions that they're making on behalf of their community? Probably so, but they should have the ability to make those decisions and do that. I am a very pro-mud, legislator, obviously. That's what my district wants. That's why my district has flourished. And I would say in terms of reforms, there probably are some things, like with any type of governmental or elected body, things that need to be taken up to make sure that the residents aren't being burdened with too much debt and things that they ultimately can't afford to pay and stuff. But I like MUDs as a way to really see communities grow.
Go ahead.
Thank you. One of the things that's always just really galled me about the Texas House is the autocratic power of the Speaker. The Speaker appoints committee members of both parties to all committees. The Speaker can kill any bill, and maybe I'm overstating what the power is, but do you see that as a problem? Do you see it as an opportunity? You can't comment because you may have to talk to these guys, but can you talk about the evolving power of the Speaker and how that can be made more democratic for all members?
Well, I'll jump into it first, and I'll let my colleague jump into it. Certainly, there is some strength in the Speaker's office. There needs to be some strength in the Speaker's office. Look at his counterpart in the Lieutenant Governor, and everything goes through there. The Speaker has to work through the committee structure, and just like the Lieutenant Governor makes all those appointments, the Speaker will make all those appointments. And it's probably the hardest, and as I see it, the single most important thing that the Speaker does is to appoint those committees and to appoint the chairs of the committees. And the chairs are the ones that have all the power. We know that. All of us have been in those positions to either benefit from it or, in fact, be the victim of it, frankly. The Speaker's office has some ability to manage the way bills are ultimately referred and so forth, But if you look at the strength of the Speaker, this is my perspective, the strength lies in the appointment of those committees and the appointment of those chairs of those committees. And then the process is a process that we all recognize is uniquely set up to kill bills. And it does it very effectively. And I would say, again, we've all been the subject of that.
But I think you've touched on something that I picked up from the membership that I've talked to, that you said you were galled by this. What the members really want to see happen in the next session is a return of power and authority to the individual members. The Speaker is no better, no worse than any of the other 149. We're elected by the same number of people in the same way, took the same oath. And so, I'm a fan of decentralization of power. And I think the body will serve best when the authority is redelegated back and kept among the membership. And so that's what I'm committed to see done. We do not need an imperial speaker any more than we need an imperial governor. We don't need that kind of concentration of power in these individuals. There's a reason that we have a representative form of government, and it's to have that power as close to the people as we can possibly get it. And the House represents that body that's closest to the people, just by the way that we're elected, who we represent. So I think you're right. And so again, I think the style of leadership we need in the next speaker is someone who counts on the talent and the membership and the body to develop those policies, not by people in the back office or people outside of the Capitol who are not responsive and owe a duty to the people they represent. Let's step up and do the job that we were elected to do. Let's develop those policies consistent with what the state wants. And the speaker's job is to facilitate that, not to dictate that.
And I would echo what both have said, especially Travis is in there. And that's what we're talking about right now. And that's those of us who are not running or having discussions with our other colleagues that are not running, saying we want to see that power with the whole membership. And to address some of that points, but you do have to have somebody that is the leader.
So my question is, as state legislators, what issues are you hoping to get feedback from millennials, specifically from your districts?
Well, I'll give a shameless plug for my daughter. Allie Stuckey is going to be speaking somewhere this afternoon. She's the conservative millennial, and so her whole deal is how do we get millennials thinking about the process. And what millennials now represent the largest voting bloc, should they choose to vote, which we hope they do. And so what we need to know from you all is a little bit what Chris said. As you look into your long-term future, what can we do today to make sure that we establish and help you establish the future that we've enjoyed in our past and present for you all as well? If we mess up on our jobs today, it does have an effect on you. So I think the things that are important to y'all are the things that you need to communicate to us. And I'm sure it's education and things like that. And technology, maybe it's, the 5G network that's coming around that a lot of people are involved in. So please be communicating. We don't hear enough from the millennial generation. We really need for you to communicate with us, no question about it.
I think we have time for one more question. Go ahead.
I know it's the other body, but I'm curious, you've talked about Harvey and disaster recovery quite a bit. We expect and are hearing from Senator Sylvia Garcia that she's going to resign, we assume, in November after her congressional election. Knowing that district represents 850,000 Houstonians, will any of you be calling on the governor to call an election quickly to fill that seat rather than holding it open?
Whoever wants it.
Well, I'm closest. Chris and I are probably closest to the Houston area there. I think those 850,000 people deserve representation in the Senate. I think that's the way our body is set, and there shouldn't be a group of people that are segmented out from having a voice in the Senate. Obviously, 1 of 31 is a pretty big deal, and so I won't be somebody who will necessarily be talking with the governor about that, but I certainly think that the people that are in that area and others that are representatives in that area and stuff should certainly have that conversation.
Representative Patty, do you want to?
Hey,
all right.
I do want to say, one last thing. I hope everybody cheers for the only undefeated team in NCAA Texas football. Go Mean Green.
Oh man.
There we go.
Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Have a good day.
Snuck it in there, didn't you?
Thank you.